So your Japan journey is actually very well documented on other podcasts and in other materials. So I'm going to save that and I'm going to utilize the time with you and not go through your whole Japan journey, but I'm here to get all of your insights out of you instead of just hearing your journey. So I hope that's okay.
That's perfect. That's wonderful.
So first and foremost, the thing that stands out for me is your ability to build a network. Right, so you've been able to do that. You've been able to do that so well, not only online but offline. I'm sure that this maybe goes back to your days working with the American Chamber of Commerce. But this ability to build a professional network of real quality relationships and trust. Tell us about it. How important is it? How do you do it? How do people do it wrong? How can we do it right?
Sure. First of all, I never saw that as an ability or something that I set out intentionally to do. Networking has always been critical for my line of work. So I'm not an accountant or a scientist, these kinds of jobs that, are really slotted to, do what you're told to do and do very clear jobs. So marketing and communications and training, they require networking, usually if you're doing those kinds of jobs. So I've been networking to survive since, I would say, college or graduate school days. And whenever I wanted to do better in my current job or find a new job, I had to reach out to other communities. I had to go to new places and meet new people. And then transitioning into someone working for myself, you need partners. You need people who can provide complementary services, and of course you need clients as well. And if you are, an unknown player in the industry, your business, your work comes from your network. So I guess to answer your original question, how do people do it? Get started as soon as possible. That's the number one thing. Don't wait and say, oh, I'm going to network when this happens or I get this job. Reach out to your industry. I believe, as Angel said on your previous podcast, just get out there and look for events and start talking to people to meet new people and build this long-term network.
Have you noticed a change in networking or connecting with people in this crazy COVID times? Like obviously, we've had to go remote. And one thing that I found really interesting, if I can indulge and share a bit of a personal story on my side, which is I've
Sure.
had people say, doing podcasts, online is so difficult. So I haven't been able to do it. And this is kind of like people that have done podcasts, for years. I started mine in lockdown. So I've only ever had Zoom meetings. I've only ever had Zoom episodes. So I haven't really known it otherwise. So we've kind of had to shift. So I kind of compare that to us having the luxury really of having this kind of like face-to-face networking. To really that kind of podcast story that if it's what you've always known, then this kind of new it's different and it's difficult and you can't do it in the same way. Or have you noticed or not really have you kind of more what are the differences in networking and staying connected with your clients in this kind of like remote COVID world?
Sure. And first of all, what you're doing is an excellent example of a way to get started networking in this world, reaching out and interviewing people and talking to people. So I second your example. For me, and I'm glad you brought this up because I wanted to mention this in the previous question. LinkedIn, I'm expanding. I've always used LinkedIn as a networking tool, but usually it's after meeting someone in person, I'm connecting with them after that. But now I'm, joining live online events, online live podcasts, and I'm meeting people in the audience, or I'm reaching out to the guest speaker. And so it's almost the same, actually. Instead of going to an in-person event and meeting people, I'm going to an online event and meeting people. Now, the volume of new people that I'm meeting is lower, but the quality seems to be higher. So
interesting. Tell me more about that.
Sure, sure. So let's say we go to a big in-person networking event in
Mm-hmm.
Tokyo.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to shake hands, and of course, pre-COVID, you're going to shake hands with,
Yeah.
you know, a lot of people, exchange a lot of business cards, but in the end, very few of those are going to be relevant
Mm.
for you. Where if you're at an online event, I'm finding I'm meeting fewer people,
Yeah.
but because of the event that I selected and the audience that it attracts, they're much more relevant to my life and business.
Yeah, interesting. And I second that as well. That it's almost like, rather than having this like huge room of people, it's really kind of a little bit more intimate, and that you do, tend to follow up. So it's really about, I guess, how you use it, isn't it? So if we talk about that, and you said obviously follow up with people, why don't you talk a little bit about the kinds of services that you offer to your clients? Because one thing that I found super interesting is that it's not this kind of big, huge international kind of client base. That actually you work with the kind of black box of like small to medium enterprises like SMEs in Japan, and people have no clue. Like if you think about Nintendo, Sony, Toyota, immediately things come to mind. But when it comes to like a small to medium enterprise, which essentially is the makeup of the Japanese economy, despite these huge gated companies, we know nothing about them. What are they like? What do you do for them? What do they need?
Well, I work with companies that I like to call foreign curious.
Foreign curious.
So
I'm curious about
foreign,
that. What's that?
they realize that to grow their business or to expand, that they need to work with foreign audiences, either foreign audiences here in Tokyo or Japan, or foreign audiences abroad. However, and partly because they are an SME, a small or medium-sized enterprise, they aren't sure who to reach out to or what to do exactly to make that connection. And that's where I come in, and the services I provide are split down the middle between marketing and communication, as well as communications coaching. So how do executives or managers present themselves and their ideas abroad or to foreign audiences?
Interesting. And I think that's a really great insight, because there is this kind of opinion that Japan is slow to change and it's closed. But I've actually noticed in some ways, and I know, this is not like a blanket statement by any stretch of the imagination, but there is certainly a dialogue around, hang on a second, maybe we can change. Maybe, there are enough people kind of like 5 to 8 years out of retirement that are saying, I want to use my time to create a legacy. I want to make sure that this business is still, running in 10 years or in 20 years time. So there is this kind of like change of mindset of the people inside the organizations. Have you found that as well, that the management, like if you think about when you and I came to Japan like 10 years ago, if you think about that compared to kind of now-ish, how would you say that kind of like management mindset has changed to being, as you said, foreign curious?
Sure, and this circles back to your original question about what is it like to work with these companies. I have definitely witnessed a more willingness to work with foreigners and seek foreign clients. A lot of that was tied into the Olympics and that.
My gosh, yes, the Olympics.
As I'm sure you are aware, and I do strongly feel that without that, we wouldn't have seen much change.
Yes.
So I agree with you. The change is there. And as far as what is it like, I think once you get over the initial hurdle of the culture gap and the differences in perceptions, I find that it's pretty similar to working with a small business all over the world. They want to survive and they want to succeed, and they're just looking for that partnership that helps them do that. And if you can deliver value in a polite way, they will appreciate your services and your offerings.
You talked about being successful and sustainable, but also with that lens of like being polite. Can we talk a little bit more about values? So I'm completely with you when we talk about that it's not really that different. You know, people often talk to us about what's it like, innovation in Japan? Yeah, well, it's different, but at the end of the day, you're still trying to do the same thing. You're still trying to equip people with the confidence, you know, to do things differently. But really, you know, there is that human element. But if we think about the more maybe even surprising values, or, you know, that you've been working with, you know, this segment for many years now, what would you say are the values that that were kind of like non-obvious at the beginning, that you were like, oh, okay, this is important. Interesting. You mentioned like
You know,
partnerships, which is interesting as well.
yes. As far as values, you know, I was fortunate enough to work in large organizations in Japan before I started working for myself. So, you know, as far as values and not value, I can't say I experienced many surprises. You know, for example, even flexible, agile, smaller Japanese companies, they do expect you to understand, you know, basic culture. Many of them will have language requirements. You know, they do want you to be able to do certain things in Japanese and understand how business works.
Yeah.
So when it comes to values, it's, I can't say I experienced many surprises. I was ready for that. As far as adding value, I think it's very important that whatever product or service you offer shows up in some measurable result in their business. For example, increase in website visitors, an increase in social media engagement, an increase in sales, for example. And I think you need to position your business to deliver those results instead of positioning your business just to say, hey, I'm going to come in and modernize you or change you without demonstrating the value of that change.
I think that's really interesting as when we talk about metrics, because if we think about what's important to a small to medium enterprise, like to an SME, they are different things. So, as you know, what we really want to do is go in and show that value. But what are the metrics that they're looking for? Because what we really want to do is equip these businesses with metrics that are really, you know, giving them real data on if they're moving forward or not. And so, for example, like, you know, Facebook likes, for example, or like Instagram likes, are not necessarily, you know, connected with you know, sales at the end of the day and things like that. So what are the kind of metrics that you use to help a Japanese company see if they're really making the right choices or not? Because we've heard some real horror stories.
Absolutely. On the marketing side, you know, I want to connect the dots between those vanity metrics and an actual
vanity metrics, the perfect term for it.
Yeah, I steal that from the lean startup. But it's connecting the dots between those metrics and an actual sale or an inquiry, at least. I'll be perfectly honest, it's rare that, you know, you have likes and impressions and you can directly connect that to a sale, but you can connect that to increased web traffic. Or what if they have hiring goals, for example? So if a client wants to attract more foreign workers and you work on copywriting and posting job ads on social media and they get more inquiries. So that's one way in the marketing side, is at least getting customers to their website and getting them to their brand. On the coaching side and in the cross-cultural communication side, you can measure success through the achievements of your clients. So if I train someone to give an effective presentation and they get funding for their startup, or they get a global level promotion and they attribute that to me, that is a clearly defined win.
Yeah, absolutely, for both parties. If we think about that and we think about, you know, setting expectations, Japan is known for that, you know, omotenashi, but also like that white glove service, the unset expectations, the midnight phone calls from your clients. You know, there's this kind of side. What's your experience been in managing expectations of an organization? And I found that especially small to medium organizations, the closer you are to the client, and almost the smaller the business is, the more they kind of reel you in as like part of the team, part of the family, hence the Sunday phone calls and like all these kinds of things. What's your experience been, and how do you manage the expectations and also those kinds of of the white glove service when you're a solopreneur, and I'm sure that you would like your Sundays for yourself.
Sure. Excellent question. And I have been very lucky in that regard. I think one of the benefits of being small is that, you can choose who you work with. Now, sometimes you don't know when a relationship is going to go in that direction. You can't see it. I've been either working or working for myself long enough to usually see some red flags if a client is going to.
What are they? What?
You can, when you visit their company, how are their employees treating you, and how are their employees treating each other? If are you being called for a meeting at some odd hours? Those, you can see those things before the contract is signed, basically. And that leads me to my next tip is having a good contract that clearly defines those expectations, times of communication, what kinds of projects are being worked on, things like that. To be specific in, to help people out that are struggling with this, a good resource is someone called Paul Jarvis. He's the author of this book called Company of One. And he lays out a lot of good techniques for, avoiding these difficult situations wherever you are in the world. Now, not a lot of those apply for in Japan. You do have to be a little bit more giving here in Japan.
Yeah, I was gonna say, when you mentioned contracts, I was like, contracts in Japan have always for me been like very fluid, kind of nice to have.
They are, and they go that way as your relationship gets stronger. But here's what I've noticed. All of my clients are happy to start with a good solid contract, and then hopefully as the relationship grows, you're familiar with how each side works, and then they do become a little bit fluid, but that fluidity is within the confines of your relationship, so nothing crazy starts to happen.
Yes.
So it's, in summary, it's all about starting off on the right foot, I think.
I agree. And if it's not necessarily going on the right foot, is there any ways to kind of, or let's take it back. If you recognize that you're in the collaboration, or you're in the client relationship, and it's not necessarily going in the direction that you would like, is there anything that you do to kind of bring it back on track?
That is a great question. To be honest, all you can really do is tactfully have a conversation. If you do have a concern, with tact, not being too direct, is really, it's just one of those painful things that you have to try to deal with in a relatively straightforward manner.
Imagine I'm your client, and I email you 45 times a day, or I call you 45 times a day, and you're like, this is a little much. Is the conversation like, "Hi, Tanaka-san," Donnie Kimball will love that because we keep referring to Tanaka-san now. Tanaka-san, is there, like, what do you even say? I'm trying to like ad-lib here on the fly, but I kind of think, what do you say?
I might say, I would do this. And I haven't been in the situation, thankfully, so you'll have to forgive me, but this is what I would try. I would come from an angle of exploring ways to work together more efficiently, because
I like that.
Those 45 calls can't be good for Tanaka-san either. And so
right. So you flip it and you say, "Gee, Tanaka-san, you must be so busy, and maybe there's something I can do on my side so you don't need to call me 45 times a day. I'm really sorry." Oh, that's good, Anthony. That's good. I like that.
Right. And I wouldn't even say flip it, but make it a mutual thing and say, look, both of us, we're both very busy, and, because it's sincere to be honest that both, it's busy for both of us and say we're
Mm-hmm.
both very busy. Can we explore ways to
Work
accomplish this
together
more
better.
efficient?
Mm-hmm.
And I
like
must
that.
say, for minor things, like, using technological tools that increase efficiency, I have had these conversations with clients, and surprisingly, they're willing to try new things. It might not always work in the long run. They'll say, this new method isn't working, or I'm sorry, but
Mm-hmm.
you'd be surprised how many clients are willing to try things with you to work more efficiently.
Tell me more about that, because Japan has a really bad rep. They have a really bad reputation of just no stonewalling, and we don't want to try things. But there are people that are, as you said, open and willing to try new things. Do you think that they're more in the SMEs because they're that much closer to the bottom line, or what do you think it is?
Working with SMEs definitely helps. They're
Right,
just
because
by.
it's you got to make payroll, like it's a big deal.
Yeah, and like I said before, they want to survive just like any
Yeah.
other company in the world. So that definitely helps compared to large organizations as
Mm-hmm.
well. So
Mm-hmm.
that is a start. Yeah.
Interesting. Can you talk to us a little bit about the very complex and unique, like third party, sales kind of consultancy, sub-consulting, subcontracting ecosystem that is Japan?
Sure. So really and surprising that I hope these answers don't bore our listeners, but when you get down to it, it's not much different than in the US. I did some freelancing in the marketing space while I was in the States,
Mm-hmm.
and I have found that it's very similar and in some ways easier
Mm-hmm.
to work independently here as well. Now,
Mm-hmm.
the marketing side is difficult, but as far as the procedures, and again, going back to the topic of network, if you have experience here, if you have a work history, if you have a
Mm-hmm.
network that is aware of what you do and
Mm-hmm.
they know your work, people will eventually see what you're doing and say, could you do that for my company? Or could you
Yeah.
do that for my friend's company? I liked this article. Can you write that for me?
Yeah.
And once small companies realize that they can outsource with you in a very easy way, that's a pretty good proposition instead of hiring, a full-time writer and all of the expenses and resources that come with that. It's a good space to be in, but you're mostly going to be working with, small and mid-sized companies.
Mm-hmm. I've also found that when a Japanese company feels comfortable enough that they can trust you and that they can then go and recommend you to other people, that it's a value for them as well. So they kind of are now like in this, hey, I can introduce you to someone. So this kind of like, I can connect you is almost like a currency, like a relationship currency in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I feel that's universal. I experienced
Mm-hmm.
that in the States as well. So yeah, in almost any country, being of value and being someone that a client is proud to introduce, that's a win-win.
Yeah, absolutely. If we talk about a little bit more about the actual work that you do for the SMEs. So if we
Sure.
talk about like the kinds of designs and the work that you do and like the solutions that you provide them, you're one thing that I'm always very interested in is when we're curating content, we're creating content.
Yes.
How do you manage that balance between the empathy for the Japanese company, right? So you have to it's still a business transaction. We have to bring them value, but at the same time, you're probably writing the content for the user, which is very often someone like foreign in Japan or with a Japanese interest. Is that right?
The user is usually from a different country. They could be in Japan, but they could be abroad and they could be interested in Japan.
So foreigners essentially with a Japanese interest, maybe they're in Japan, maybe not. So it's kind of like open, especially this COVID time, they're certainly not there. But if, assuming moving forward, how do you manage that kind of balance of, delivering value and creating empathy on those both sides? Because I think especially, when we work also in like user-centric design work, we're really thinking about the user, and we're really trying to deliver something meaningful to them. But you really have two users. You have your client, but then you also have their client, and that's this kind of and that's for me, it's a really interesting relationship to be able to manage. What's that like, and how do you create value and empathy for both sides?
Sure, and Angel and I always talk about this. This is a great question, and my process is this: I'm usually hired as a consultant or someone that my client is looking to provide the best way forward. So I start with the end consumer or the end user, and I focus on making the best possible article or social media post or whatever it is for them. And I present, I present that to the client. I say, this is my recommendation given these variables. At that point, it's up to the client how far they want to go. And some clients, have a lot of trust and say, hey, go for it.
No problem. Yeah, we trust you.
Which is great. And other clients, they're more conservative, and you have to workshop it. And the final product might not be my original recommendation, but in the end, I'm a business and they're the client.
Correct. Yeah.
And I think as long as you start with your best foot forward and you document every part of the process, so you have an email somewhere saying, I suggested this and I expected these results. As long as you have that paper trail, in the end, if the final product is a little different than what you expected, it's unfortunate, but you are a business and we are serving clients.
I can really appreciate that. And one other thing that I found, because it's disheartening, right? Because you go in and you put your effort into it. You've really done, as you said, you've done all that you can to create this document or to create this content with as much value as possible, and then you see it diluted, and you're like, there's a reason I added this, and there's a reason that was there, and it was cut. One thing that I've found to not feel so disheartened in those moments is to treat the process not as one-time transactional relationships, but to say, I'm going to show this client that or let's just say I'll make the recession now. Okay, I'll step back. I'll receive. I won't push my agenda too much. I'll let them go. And then, I'll use the next opportunity to push a little more, and then the next opportunity to push a little more, rather than to go all in this like blackjack model. Okay, all on, whatever, 21. I don't know. I should play that blackjack if I use blackjack now. Jeez. And then rather this kind of like one hit, kind of like Las Vegas bet style. But to show them, and also this also relates to, you have other ways that you also show Japanese clients that you're committed. You also mentioned that speaking Japanese or having some kind of proficiency of the culture is also important to showing that kind of commitment. Is there anything else that you think is important to showing or to proving that commitment with a client?
Absolutely. But before that, if you don't mind, I want to second what you said. I love how you mentioned, it's a gradual process. You don't have to do everything on that first try. You've got to earn trust and build the relationship. And that ties into, showing clients that you're in it for the long run. And then one other quick tip on that topic before going back to the other one is for creatives and coders and people like that. Another way to keep your spirits up, and when your client work isn't going how you expected, is make sure you're carving out time to be producing your own content on your portfolio, your blog, and so on.
Absolutely. Rather than just saying, no, I haven't had the opportunity to do it work. So this is, for example, where, you and I are speaking in terms of, we're hired external consultants. But if you're internal in an organization and you're blaming your boss that they won't give you time to do whatever it is that you want to do it on your own time. If you like it,
yes.
and if you're passionate enough about it, do it on your own time, and then use that even, the work that you've done in your private time, and then bring that back and use that even as data as to why it's a good business case for your company to do this new social media strategy or to write this new kind of content. and then you're giving your Japanese boss a little more confidence in saying yes rather than just getting the no.
Yeah, sometimes you have to prove your ideas outside of the conventional path. And, if you're a marketer or a writer, you should always be producing content, and it doesn't always need to be paid or contracted. And I often say our best work is probably going to be the work we create for ourselves because it's undiluted, and
yes.
That work can oftentimes bring more clients than the work that you've done for clients because it's uncompromised and it's your pure vision. So absolutely, to get over that's another tip. But sorry, should I go back to the question about being here for the long run and showing your dedication?
Oh yeah, well, I we can certainly touch on that. I know that you mentioned like Japanese being one of it, but I think I saw somewhere that only 1/3 of your work is really in Japanese and the rest is in English. Can you talk a little bit about, and this is something that often comes up, is creating that that your Japanese is not necessarily your only skill, that really there's so many other skills, but if we drop the kind of like the skill lens for a moment, and if we take the commitment lens, this is one thing that we haven't really spoken about much on this podcast, which I think is super important, is how to build that trust in the client, because they look at you and they're like, you're not Japanese, maybe you're gonna leave. You know what I mean? There's still that kind of like client mentality. But what we're trying to do is say, no, we've been here. Like I went to high school there. You know what I mean? Like. And you're trying to build this kind of what I would call like trust assets, in a way in your clients. What are the things that you do to kind of build that commitment, show that commitment to the longer term relationship?
Sure. Well, I hate to say it because it kind of brings us back to the skill aspect, but we talk about learning Japanese, and we often talk about it in the frame of a skill set to help you get more clients. But the side effect of learning Japanese is just by speaking Japanese at a daily conversation level, a polite daily conversation level, not even like keigo or super high, that signals your commitment. Because who is going to learn Japanese to that level, and just disappear from Japan or, the fact that you have spent so many hours going over kanji and grammar and all of that, it signals that you are here for the long run. And that's a great tool for people who don't have, the kinds of histories with Japan that you and I have. You can get a good grasp on the language in 2 years or less, and that shows that, okay, I've only been here for 2 years, but I know the language very well. That's going to get clients to really pay attention to you.
Yeah, the thing for me that was the most beneficial about learning the Japanese language was understanding how these sentences are then constructed. Like, what does a Japanese person think in order to speak? You know what I mean? So for example, if you say things like listen, right? So listen in English is the word listen, but if I say kite kureru versus kite ageru, like means I'm listening, but am I doing you the favor or are you doing me the favor? There's all these different kind of like giving and receiving verbs, which for me were like really kind of brought that view of, oh wow, there's much more emphasis on the effort and the transaction and the connection between people than I really had ever anticipated before learning the language.
Yeah, and that is one of the things that makes the language such a difficult undertaking. It's not just a one-to-one translation. There's loads of culture packed into the language.
Yes. And if we think about like these one-to-one translations, which is obviously like marketing like nightmare, right? So we've seen terrible, we've seen some real like horror stories, like when it comes to like just Google Translate, even really serious, documents. Maybe it's like maybe it's signs, especially at restaurants or even like on the street. Like I've seen some very serious corporate documents being translated by Google. At the same time, though, that's really not where we need to go. But at the same time, you spoke recently a little bit about the kind of the future of using things like, AI and, search engine optimization and things like that. So can we talk a little bit about, firstly, how to make technology, particularly in Japan, your friend, not your foe, because like we've seen some real Jackfish disasters.
Sure. Okay. Basically, one thing I've noticed with technology and AI is the rapid improvement of the quality of things like Google Translate. It's still not there. It's still not perfect, but with this improvement, I've noticed that more companies are willing to experiment with basic English web pages or basic English marketing. So it's created a level of confidence in Japanese companies. Now, where they can go with that, and this is a new concept, so I might not get it right, but I was recently reading an article about this company Notion, one of these productivity tools that I'm playing with, and they had no globalization strategy. They just made their product in English, and they just put it on the internet. They did not lock it to a region. Anyone in the world could use it. And they noticed that Korea actually really picked up on it and started using it, started making forums and groups around it, and it really took off. And they didn't have an official localization, but because Koreans picked up on the English version and did their own localization, that directed Notion to launch their global strategy. And I was thinking, if more Japanese SMEs could, start with a dual language product from the beginning, they start with a service that's in Japanese and English, maybe a software as a service, and they simply just put this software out there to the world. Don't lock it only to Japan or only to Asia. Just anyone in the world with internet can access it in English. I think that could accelerate the global plans of a lot of Japanese startups and SMEs. Again, start with Japanese and English, put it out in the world, and see what countries start using it, and then follow that demand trail. I think that's a much smoother process than now, where it's kind of, I want to check out this country, or I want to check out this country. I don't know if I'm going to be a success. Just put your product out there with a quality English version and see what countries pick it up.
Yeah, that idea of testing. Do you use testing in any of your content as well? Now, I know that we're speaking about kind of like more of a business focus and, reverse engineering the success of a global expansion, which I, completely agree with. But do you use testing in any of your content, like A/B testing?
Sure.
Things like that? What kind of testing do you do with your content?
I'm not too heavy on A/B testing, but with my clients, we test out different headline length, word lengths, things like that, images, and kind of all of the basics. But as a content creator and somewhat of a creative, I always just try to put out what I think will resonate with my audience first, then see how it resonates, and then maybe tweak certain elements of that for the next production.
I love that. And if we think about that and think about the next production and what do we include now versus what do we include later, what one never-ending journey for me is learning how to help Japanese clients prioritize, because they want everything right now, in every form. And you're like, okay, well, as much as I understand, that this is what we want to achieve, if we were to take these, initiatives and then break them down, maybe like in a modular way, and then we could have, this be our goal for this week, and then this be, or even for this piece of content, and this be our next goal. Like, how do you manage that kind of, we want to, that killing two birds with the one stone analogy, that idea that we want to kind of do everything at once. Like, you walk into Don Quixote, there's like everything. You can buy ramen, but you can also buy like a TV, so like, how do you manage, or how do you help, or how do you support Japanese clients to prioritize?
I guess that goes back again to setting expectations in the beginning and having these clearly defined, but easy to understand contracts. And for example, with one of my clients, right from the get-go, we divided the project into phases, and each phase had many phases in it, and it was all in writing, so we could follow that roadmap. And whenever there was scope creep or any doubt about what to do next, we referred back to that plan. So so much starts from the beginning of your relationship, or even before that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good insight and a really good takeaway, is to have like a phase-based approach to the project. I found that also reduces like anxiety also at the beginning, this, because the Japanese, they don't want to kind of just, do it once, and, they want this kind of like longer term relationship. And I found that if you can work with them or sell them a solution that's a phased solution, that builds a little bit more confidence and reduces the anxiety a little bit. Have you found the same thing?
Yeah, absolutely. It's much easier for a relationship to deal with a small component than it is to handle the burden of just this one huge thing that no one knows how to tackle. So absolutely, I certainly agree.
Right. And if we think about, that's the way how a Japanese company prioritizes, but you also, being, you only have, a certain amount of hours in the day, you can only produce like a certain amount of content. How do you prioritize what kind of content you create? How do you prioritize, just how you spend your time in a day?
Well, I'm a morning person, so all the important stuff is stacked in the morning. So
are you like a 5 a.m. morning person, or like a 7 a.m. kind of morning person?
I'm a 5:30 a.m. morning person. However, I will admit, as long as the week is normal and everything's going okay, the first hour is studying kanji and Japanese, trying as my brain comes online in the morning.
I don't do that anymore.
Well, I mean, maybe you don't need to, but I'm struggling all the time with the language, so and kind of pushing it to the next level. So 5:30, wake up,
kanji.
Study some Japanese, kanji, grammar, read if I have time, all of that, and then it's time to, of course, you got to eat breakfast and do all that. But when it comes to work, as soon as possible, I want to take on the most important and most difficult project, because I'm a morning person. As the day goes by, my brain gets more and more tired. So yeah, I tackle things as soon as I can during the day.
Is there, and so for you, it's just kind of like what seems to be the most impactful, or what's the most difficult at the time, and you just start with that and then work down?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if we think about also you being, a solopreneur running your own business, and time is certainly one thing, but in order for you to be able to show up and do your best work, you also need to have that kind of health, that healthy body as well. And this is something that I found that we don't really talk about as much in business, that we really should, is that how do we lead not only a healthy business, because that's one thing, what a healthy business looks like, but how healthy you are within the business, I've also found is really essential in order for you to grow and really do your best work. What are some things that you do, or what's your perspective, or how do you manage the health conversation around being an entrepreneur or being a solopreneur, and managing all those expectations and projects, as well as managing your own health and well-being?
Well, that's the eternal struggle, and it really hits you like a brick when you leave an organization and start working for yourself, and you realize, wait a second, I don't have sick days, or wait a second, I need to work during my vacation because the client's business is still going. So then you realize that, okay, well, if I don't have sick days, then I don't want to be getting sick, for example. And so for me, I prioritize, getting outside and running and cycling and weight training. And sometimes that means you might have to take on a little bit less work. You know, you might not be able to schedule things as tightly as you want to, but in the long run, it's important to, you know, keep your immunity up through exercise, through eating well, and sleeping. And as everybody knows, I'm working on the eating and the sleeping part, one thing at a time. But I'm quite happy with the exercise part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I don't know what your experience is, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. But when you're managing these kinds of complex stakeholders, where you're managing languages, you're managing culture, you're managing your own expectations, you're managing their expectations. Often you're then doing it for this third party or an external user. And I find that that's actually, it takes a lot of energy. And I think that we have to be honest with ourselves as being, foreigners working abroad. And I think we have to be honest and say we don't have the same kind of playing field. You know, we do have a higher level of energy output, and that doesn't mean that we're like weaker, or it doesn't mean that we're not doing enough. It actually means that we're doing double. Sometimes the work that we do often is translating into double work. So any conversation that you have, you're having it twice. Any work that you're doing it twice. And so I think this, sometimes what I feel to be exhaustion, and then sometimes sometimes people draw a very quick bridge to like depression or things like that abroad. And I think, well, actually, I don't know if it's necessarily that. I think if you just took a step back and were a little bit more patient, a little bit more kind to yourself, understanding that the work that you're doing takes an incredible amount of energy, and if you then rewarded yourself for that, like you said, eat well, sleep well, look after your body, I think maybe we wouldn't necessarily go down that, that very, I don't want to call it like the foreign rabbit hole, but I'm sure we've all had it. You know what I mean? You're sitting down and you're tired and you're like, what am I even doing in Japan? What am I even doing here? This is it, you know what I mean? And then that kind of conversation is super not useful, because we've decided this is where our life is. We just got to look after our bodies better. What do you think? What's it been like for you?
I'm so glad you said that. I think we fall in the trap of kind of trying to get rich quick, or make our dreams come true overnight. And rarely does it work that way. And, we have to see it as a marathon, basically. And to complete a marathon, we need to pace ourselves. So like you mentioned, and like I mentioned, maybe we can't take on 15 clients a week at this pace and be healthy. It might not be possible. So maybe it'll take a little bit longer to achieve our dreams, but we're going to do it in a sustainable way. And I think for people who are thinking about following in kind of in our footsteps, it's important to, the first thing you got to do, and this is the toughest part for me, and I think everybody, is build up your business to that survival level, where you're paying your bills, you're paying your taxes.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you can't pay your rent, you're not sleeping well. So let's get that out of the way first. Yeah, let's do that first. But once you're there.
Yeah, once you're there, you might need to slow it down a little bit. And like you said, we're not comfortable until our basic needs are met. So we do have to go crazy in the beginning. But when things are growing steadily, we be careful about rushing. We might not want to rush. We might want to grow gradually, sustainably, and be around for the long term, because that's what it's all about.
And I think it is really all about that long term. And I think one of the drivers is certainly that kind of a deeper connection to the kind of value that you're really providing, to understand that, that it's okay to, turn down a project, or it's okay to take some time, that, there's plenty of, things you can do. There's plenty of clients that you can serve, that it's not going to kind of like dry up, overnight, but you can dry up overnight. So we want you to really take care of yourself, especially when you're living and working abroad, because at the end of the day, it's not a level playing field. And once I kind of accepted that, for me, things, started to change, and I think it's totally okay. And so it's what we then need to do is understand, okay, what's the real value that I'm bringing to this client, right? And so this is a little bit about what you referred to as what the Japanese call plus alpha, which is really kind of like your USP kind of, what makes you special. And I think by identifying what the real value is in, your USP for your clients, I think that might even help you then even prioritize and even kind of think about the work that you do a little bit differently, rather than, doing these endless, emails or work. Take a step back and think about, where's my real value? What is something that somebody else can't do, and then deliver on that? What are some ways that you think that kind of plus alpha culture, what are some ways that people can either identify themselves, what is it, that's really their USP, but also what's a way that, that they can then really share it, because, you're big on sharing your work, and making your value known.
Sure, sure. Well, the first step is to finding your plus alpha. So you have your core skill. Let's say, you are, I'll just use the example I often use. You're a writer and you want to sell those services. So that's your core. You know that. But then take a look at your other strengths. Maybe you are also an excellent photographer, for example. And a lot of clients who need writing, if they need blog posts, they're going to need photos with that as well. And if your photography is good enough, you can say, hey, all of my blog posts that I provide clients, they come with these pictures as well. Whereas other writers cannot offer that little plus alpha. Another example for writers is the ability to edit as well.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
A lot of people think writing and editing are the same. They're totally different skill sets. But if you are a great writer and editor and you submit articles to a client, you're going to either save them money because they don't need an editor, or you're going to save their editor's time, which either way, you're saving money and time and effort. So that's kind of the plus alpha approach that I often talk about.
That's interesting. And you know why, I'm just kind of like reflecting now as you're saying that, why Japan is a really great place to leverage your plus alpha is because they don't ask for very specific titles. Like the role expectation and the titles are like very fluid. Like if you turn up and say, hi, I'm a digital marketer, I'm looking for a job in digital marketing, they might be like, we don't do digital marketing, but it's because you use the words digital marketing that they don't know what it is, because usually they use PR, it's still PR in Japan very much.
That's right.
So actually, because Japan is so fluid in terms of their expectations or their titles, that you can really then deliver, because then you just show up and you say, hi, I'm Anthony, or hi, I'm Brittany, these are the things that I can do. And because of that ambiguity, actually you have a little bit more playing room to try new things than you would, for example, I know certainly in Australia, if they hire you to do something, they don't ask you to do anything else,
Okay. Got it. Yeah, absolutely. I should warn people though, you do have to be careful, because you don't want to fall into a situation of scope creep either, where all of a sudden you're giving all of these services away for free. So there is a balance.
Right, absolutely. So it would be, the balance would be, hi, I'm a writer, and I can do this thing. But because, and then as they start editing, you could add in something like, would you also like me to edit this? And we can add that as like a phase 2 to the project. And then this way you're not working for free and you're not, getting that scope creep, what Anthony mentioned. That might be a good balance, right? Like really getting back to the, as you said, tactful, polite discussion or communication, right?
Yeah, that's a perfect example. And I guess one way to figure out what to offer as a plus alpha and what to charge for is just examine your work style. So personally for me, when I write something that I submit to a client, I'm just embarrassed if I don't edit it, if I don't apply the Chicago Manual of Style and put all, the right italics and make sure I'm using my commas correctly. I'm embarrassed to let something leave my desk without thorough proofreading and editing. So, of course, editing time is budgeted into a project, but there are clients who say, hey, we have an editor, you're going to submit your document to the editor. Well, they're going to get a pretty well edited document either way. That's just how I work. So, examine, I guess, your workflow and your habits, and use that to determine what's a plus alpha, what's already built in to the way you work that's going to be a basically free benefit to your client, and then what other things are you good at, but it's kind of an extra step that you can charge for. I think it's worth investing time to figuring that out.
And I think a Japanese client, despite what people may think, is actually a really good person to try that on, because they're more willing. If we've already got a relationship, I'd just much rather you go ahead and edit it rather than you be my writer and then I have to go and find another editor. If you can do it all because you've already gone through my trust filter, just please go and do it. I really think that a Japanese client is really I don't want to say perfect client, but they're a really open client to that kind of additional services, which is why you get those, long-term relationships, right?
Very good point. Very good point. Yeah, if you demonstrate competence and they already have a relationship with you, they're going to be much more willing to have you do it than seek out another mysterious entity that could be good or could cause trouble in their company. So that's an excellent point.
I love that. I cannot believe that our hour is almost up. I still have so many questions for you. But before you go, I need to know,
Sure.
if we think, okay, let's think where we are. It's like COVID-19. We're still in quarantine. The Olympics were canceled. If we think about the next, period for like Japanese SMEs, what are you excited about for them? And what are what are some of the things, or what are some of the challenges on the horizon? And then at the same time, let's take that, those same things. What are we excited about? What are the challenges? But also for those entrepreneurs. And, is there any way that these Japanese SMEs and entrepreneurs, especially foreign entrepreneurs, can work together?
Ooh, good question. Yeah, as you started out, it's a hard time to think about the future. I was just in America, last January before this COVID-19 thing blew up. And back then I couldn't imagine we would be living in the world we're living now.
No one did, yeah.
No one could. So, that's shaken me a little bit about trying to think about the future too much. I'm taking things day by day. However, I do believe that in the long term, if Japan wants to be a global player, if Japan wants to grow its economy, there's only one direction to go, and that's out. We're on an island, the population is decreasing. There's only one way to go. And, English is kind of the global language, which means you're going to need globalized products and services. And I'm just excited to work with the companies that are open-minded to exploring that, even if it's step by step, little by little. We don't have to rush out and fly overseas and do everything there. But if they're willing to kind of put their toe in the water, that's what I'm excited about working on. And as far as foreign entrepreneurs or solopreneurs working with these companies, I think there's a lot of opportunity here. As you mentioned at the beginning of our session, SMEs power this economy. And, SMEs and startups, they're the ones who are often the best fit for a solopreneur or a small business or a freelancer. So I think if things go as planned, and who knows if that's going to happen anymore, there's going to be great synergy between global-minded Japanese SMEs and foreign small business entrepreneurs.
Right, and this is really time is of the essence, because I wouldn't wait for things to, in quotation marks, get back to normal. I would actually use this time, if you're thinking about, reaching out to clients or even clients that you haven't spoken to for a long time. What I would do now, what I have done is I would use this time of uncertainty to build trust, because Japanese clients and customers are very comfortable in trust. As we know, tsunami, Japanese word, typhoon, Japanese word. We're used to, getting, knocked by these, and I think Evan mentioned this as well, the deep connection between, natural disasters and innovation, that if you can really use this kind of time, which essentially is, comparable with a natural disaster. If you can use this as like trust building time, and also as we know, relationships take time to build. So if you can use this kind of downtime in the economy to build relationships, this actually might be a really great time for you as a solopreneur to start, just assessing the market. Is there an opportunity for you to open a new service or something? And I know people might say, you're crazy, think about the economy. I get it. But at the same time, I'm not saying quit your job and leave work or anything. What I'm saying is take the time now to build those relationships. That actually we began the conversation with, is to build that network. And I think in this time, especially because it's so crazy, I think if people remember that you reached out now, I think that's probably worth 100 times more trust points than like a normal economy.
Sure. And I'm so glad you said that. And that does bring us full circle. And the beauty of networking, and I think before we wrap up, it's so important to define networking. Networking is not sales. Like, sending someone a LinkedIn message and saying,
distribution.
Yeah, or reaching out to someone online and saying, hey, how are you doing? By the way, do you need your website translated? That's not networking. Networking is simply talking to people. If someone makes an interesting social media post, or someone writes something interesting or tells an interesting story, networking is just reaching out to them and saying, hey, I really liked your content. I'm a new follower. Can I ask about your business? How are things going? It's just communicating. And that takes nothing more than your time. And it's appropriate regardless of the economy as well. And then, you build your relations there. And then the next thing you know, if you're coming from abroad, you find yourself here in Japan and you're like, wow, I have all of these people that I talked to, a few years ago, and we've kept in touch. Let's see what's going on. That's all it is.
That's so true. That's so true. And on that note, because otherwise I'll just keep asking you questions, I just wanted to thank you.
My pleasure.
I just wanted to thank you so much for your time. There's so much else that I would love to dive into with you, but I think we'll make a polite cut here, and we'll just have to have you back, and we'll have to discuss all those other things that I would love to dive into with you at another stage. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and giving a little bit more face and a little bit more voice to what it's like for that SME in Japan, and also what it's like as a solopreneur.
Yeah, and thank you for the thrilling conversation. I'd love to do it more too. So I hope we can continue in the future.